Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon. This is a very bad time to present. I will remove my mask. Hindi rin ako komedyante, so I won't be able to make you laugh. But we will be discussing IGR. I'll be discussing how we're going to strengthen local governance in the BARMM through intergovernmental relations. Ano ba yung role ng national, regional, and local government? Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, what is IGR? Okay, babalikan lang, just for context. Actually, IGR, or intergovernmental relations, refer to the connective mechanisms through which governments within a political system interact to ensure coordination and cooperation between different levels of governance. So if you look at this, you will find that coordination and cooperation, that's a hallmark of IGR, actually can resolve issues. It can also avoid duplicity. So let's take note of the word duplicity. So we're trying to avoid duplicity. We're doing IGR. We're setting up IGR bodies because one of the goals is to avoid duplicity. So this has bearing on the functions of the national, regional, and the local government units. Now, IGR has different dimensions to it. It can be formal, it can be informal, it can also be horizontal. So horizontal is between and among the local government units. Vertical is across administrative hierarchy, or sectoral between governments and private sector. So the IGR is a very important aspect of governance and is actually grounded on the principles of decentralization and democracy. Okay. Next slide. Okay. Can we go to the previous slide? Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Okay, so just to go back, what is decentralization? We know the DILG is here. So it's a transfer of power and authority from the central institution to the lower or local levels of government system. And there are three aspects or pillars of decentralization: devolution, deconcentration, and debureaucratization. So devolution is the political or territorial decentralization wherein local governments are empowered for self-governance, while deconcentration is removing or those powers and functions from a central structure down to the lower level. So it is the administrative decentralization. It involves delegation of responsibility of national agencies to the province, the city, and the municipalities and regional bodies. While debureaucratization is the transfer of public functions and responsibilities to the private sector and non-government organizations. Okay. Now, for IGR and delineation of roles, next slide, please. Now, ideally, there are different levels of the government, no, on how to operate autonomously. So the IGR is set up to resolve governance issues through coordination and cooperation. IGR mechanisms are avenues to resolve confusion, duplication, and conflict involving the different tiers of government. Now, these issues cannot be avoided, and this is what we're experiencing now in the BARMM. And there will always be a need for the government to work together on their common or shared goals. Next slide. Now, the IGR has always been part of our Constitution, our policies, despite the fact that we have a unitary system. So surprise, surprise, the IGR is not just between the asymmetrical relationship between the national government and the autonomous region. There is IGR in the local government code. Despite the fact that we have a unitary system, these are mainly centered on national and sub-national relations. So examples of IGR mechanisms are found in the local government code, you have Section 25 on national supervision, you have Section 33 on interlocal cooperation, and you have Section 35 on linkages with NGOs. So you will find that under Section 25 for national supervision, the national offices must coordinate with one another and with the LGUs. It says with the LGUs in the discharge of their project implementation functions. In fact, the President, as we have already discussed earlier, exercises general supervision over the local government units. It may direct assistance to them as needed, and this is in a vertical relationship. When it comes to Section 33, on interlocal cooperation, the LGUs may group themselves. So, and then consolidate or coordinate their efforts, services, and resources. For example, in Metro Manila, you have the MMDA. Among LGUs, you have the League of Municipalities, League of Cities, League of Provinces. So pwedeng ganon. And then Section 35 pertains to linkages naman with the civil society organizations, joint ventures with the private sector, and etc. Okay, next slide. Now, what about BARMM? If IGR is important to the national and local relations, all the more it is critical to BARMM. So under BARMM, the Bangsamoro government is considered an autonomous regional government. It's found in the Constitution. And it's part of a unitary system, but there is an asymmetrical relationship between the national government of the Republic of the Philippines and the regional government. It has constituent units, provinces, cities, municipalities, barangays, and special geographical areas within its territorial jurisdiction. It has the authority to regulate, so the term is regulate, the affairs of these LGUs in accordance with the BOL and the future Bangsamoro Local Government Code. Now, the struggle for self-determination of the BARMM is significantly anchored on the belief that local context-driven governance is better equipped to respond to specific social, political, cultural, and economic needs of the Bangsamoro in the same region. Okay, next slide. Now, BARMM has been delegated with this asymmetric authority. And this delegation of power is found in the Constitution and in the BOL. So it has a unique structure and relationship with the national government. It is also reflective of the recognition of the distinct Bangsamoro identity and also the aspiration of the Bangsamoro for self-governance. Next slide. Now, the national government and the Bangsamoro government, as provided under the BOL, provides under Section 1, Article 6, that the President will exercise general supervision over the Bangsamoro government to ensure that laws are faithfully executed. And then under Article 6, Section 2, it enumerates all of the matters that the Bangsamoro government can exercise, how it can exercise its authority. Section 1 states that all the powers, the functions, and responsibilities that are not found or not granted by the Constitution or by the national law to the Bangsamoro government shall be vested in the national government. So it is clearly specified anong powers ang sa BARMM, anong powers ang sa national government. Now note that the BOL, can we go back to that slide? The BOL has been precise in defining the roles and powers of the national government and the Bangsamoro government. It's very precise. But even with these provisions, the BOL has also mandated the institution of IGR mechanisms within the regional government. Bakit kaya meron pa ring IGR? Okay, now let's go to the next slide. Now, in the BOL, there are IGR mechanisms that are indicated there. Next slide, please. So these BOL-sanctioned IGR mechanisms are the following. You have the Intergovernmental Relations Body. The function of the IGR body is to coordinate and resolve issues on intergovernmental relations. Now, who handles this IGR body? Actually, it's the national government. So it's a good thing that we're having this conference and there's a presence of national government agencies here so that we are reminded on the responsibilities of the national government with respect to the BARMM. So the IGRB is co-chaired by the Finance Secretary. So currently, Finance Secretary Carlos Dominguez and Education Minister in the BARMM, Mohagar Iqbal. So that's the IGR body. Did they have meetings already? Well, last December 16, 2019, they had their first consultative meeting in Davao City, and they signed the terms of reference. That was in 2019, pre-pandemic. The IGRB is supported by a joint secretariat from the national government and the BARMM. It's composed of representatives from OPAP or OPAPRU for the national government and representatives of various agencies in the BARMM government. Take note, various agencies in the BARMM government. Is the parliament present in the IGR body? Well, all of us here are not part of that. There's also no reporting made to the parliament with respect to the agreements made and what's the status of the IGR body. There are MPs who are in the IGR body, but they're there, one or two of them, because they are part of the government of the day. Okay. Now the other, well, based only on information, they have already met 10 times to deliberate and resolve various IGR issues. Why is the IGR body very important? Because of the issues that were raised this morning, from salaries of higher education institutions, HEIs, the salaries of the teachers and personnel, the salaries and funding, for example, of nationally funded programs. Ibig sabihin, under the national departments, but implemented in the BARMM. So in DepEd and CHED, for example, you have scholarships. Under DepEd, you have the School Building Program, or SBP. Under the DSWD, there are 5 banner programs that are nationally funded. Ibig sabihin, hindi kasama sa block grant, but it is a continuing program by the national agencies. So you have the 4Ps, senior citizen, etc. What happens there? Because previously in the ARMM, those funds are transferred from the DBM. The funds are found in the GAA, respective GAA of the departments. Then, based on a negative list or cash advance system, from the DBM, the funds are transferred to the ARMM. From the regional office of the regional governor, they're transferred to the different departments for implementation. Currently, BARMM na. So this had to be discussed. So there was a time from 2019, and then the pandemic came, where these programs were not implemented, delayed, but the funds were downloaded. So for example, under DSWD, the 4-piece program, the funds for the MOE, NPS were downloaded, but the cash grants are directly downloaded to Land Bank. So dun sa bank kukunin. But for the rest, they were downloaded, pero dahil hindi clear ang relations between the national government and the regional government, na-delay ang implementation. So you had a lot of workers working under, for example, 4-piece program, senior citizen, working under the Department of Health, no, yung kanilang MECA program. These are nationally funded programs. Then you also have under the Department of Health, National Department of Health, the program on HPEP. These are the health facilities, no? Health facilities for the entire country. Meron din sa BARMM. Anong mangyayari doon? Anong mangyayari sa scholarships na under sa yung GASPE, no? Under sa national, for example, sa CHED. These matters should be threshed out in the IGR body. Okay. So for now, I won't be able to give you any official announcement as to how they have resolved this or whether this has been resolved. Because based on the study that has been made, it was raised earlier. For example, they went to Sulu, they also went to Tawi-Tawi, and they've learned that their salaries have not yet been given. So parang na-shock na lang sila. But it's actually in the law, and it has been decided also at the national level. The other important IGR body, why is it still called IGR? So IGR is not just between the national and the regional government. Pwede ring horizontal IGR. So this group, the Council of Leaders, is found in the BOL. Okay? And it is identified there. It's a council of leaders where you have the regional government, the parliament is represented, the executive authority is represented, and the local government units, plus all sectors, from women to farmers to youth, they're all represented. Traditional leaders, the ulama. Okay, so it's actually a really good way, structure, mechanism to discuss and resolve issues, the burning issues from the ground. But the Council of Leaders is supposed to advise the Chief Minister on matters of governance in the BARMM. Now, has this body already convened? Technically, no. They convened. There was a sort of a Council of Leaders meeting, but it was for political reasons. It was done in Davao, but not based on that. It was not a formal Council of Leaders meeting because we have not yet, the Parliament has not identified, nominated, nor elected who will be part of the Council of Leaders. So walang ganong mechanism na na-set up. Now the other one, dito I'm part of this, the Philippine Congress Bangsamoro Parliament Forum. And the purpose of this is for the Parliament and the National Congress, both at the Senate and the lower house, would be able to coordinate legislative initiatives for both levels, no? For both levels. We haven't had any meeting yet. And our term, no, not term, our appointments are about to end by June 30, based on the latest pronouncement coming from OPAP and the Office of the President. So we have not yet met officially. Why do we need to meet? Again, in the Philippine Congress Bangsamoro Parliament Forum, we would have been able to thresh out the issues that have not been resolved under the IGR body through policy making. Kailangan ba ng batas? Do we need to amend the law? Do we need to pass law? Does Congress have to pass law? Or does the Parliament have to pass a law to resolve the issues on, for example, funding, devolution, decentralization of powers? So this has not happened. Next slide. Now, what else are the other BOL-sanctioned IGR mechanisms? We have the Intergovernmental Fiscal Policy Board. This is a very important board. It aims to address matters concerning the region's financial needs and revenue-raising capacity. It's co-chaired by, again, Secretary Dominguez and Chief Minister Murad Ibrahim, who also at the time, he sits as the Minister of Finance, Budget and Management. Now it's MP Bides Pakasem. Now it has already convened twice. The TOR has already been approved as of 2020. Okay? So I'm not sure what has happened or what has been discussed there in the IFPB. Why do we not know? Not just because I'm in the minority, I'm just designated as the minority floor leader, but actually we're all the same. We're all government nominees in the BTA because there's no reporting back to the Parliament, which is the very nature of what a parliamentary form of government is. It's supposed to be there. Everything happens there in the Parliament. But unfortunately, this is not happening. Hopefully, these are some things. I'm saying this so that we can improve later on. So I'm telling myself, I'm telling my colleagues in the Parliament, and also the future Parliament. These are the matters, these are the gaps that we need to improve on. The other group, IGR body, is the joint body for the zones of joint cooperation. Now, this is very important together with the Intergovernmental Fiscal Policy Board. Why? Because of the resources that are found in the BARMM. We have the Sulusi, we have the Moro Gulf, and we have Liguasan Marsh. What's common among them? Anong makikita doon? There's a very huge potential for oil and gas in those areas, and other minerals. But we need to establish yung policies for the zone. Ano ba yung area na yan? And how are we going to cooperate, not just with the national government, but with the neighboring administrative regions and local government units? For example, like Zamboanga City or Gensan or North Cotabato or Davao. So itong areas na to, or in Zamboanga Peninsula. So this has not, it's supposed to be, it convened for the first time in June 2020 to discuss the TOR. Hindi pa na-approve yung TOR. It's co-chaired by the DA Secretary William Dar and the BARMM's MAFAR, Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Agrarian Reform, Minister Muhammad Yaqub. The members also include representatives adjacent to the Sulusi and the Moro Gulf. Okay? But how did they set this up? By the way, it was all set up between the government of the day. The government of the day is headed by the Chief Minister and the Cabinet. We call them the government of the day, or the GOTD. So they negotiated, they coordinated with the national agency in charge of this body. And then finally, we have the IIDB. The IIDB is the Intergovernmental Infrastructure Development Board. It's supposed to synchronize national and Bangsamoro infrastructure development plans. It convened twice. The TOR and composition was approved in January 2021. Anong issues, bakit? So what now? Whether it convened or not, meron bang mga problema? Yes, there are problems on the ground that need to be resolved by these bodies. So for example, right now, roads, the national roads, okay, because it's not found in the BOL, yung maintenance ng national roads, it's no longer, it's just Ministry of Public Works. Tinanggal yung highways. So highways belongs to DPWH National. So no one is maintaining, from the BARMM, nobody is maintaining the national roads. So pasensya na po, if you go to BARMM, by land, in the landlocked areas of BARMM, that you will find that some of the roads are not really well maintained. Because hindi sigurado sino ba ang gagastos for that. Because that has to be funded. It has to be included in the GAA of the DPWH. It also has, whether there is a maintenance or not, we have to allocate some funds also for the Ministry of Public Works. So medyo magulo. But as they say, kasi nga, bago pa ang BARMM, so these are baby steps. But we are now on our third year. Okay, and there are two more, next slide, IGR bodies. The Intergovernmental Energy Board is supposed to resolve all matters on energy and power generation. It is co-chaired by the MENRE, Ministry of Environment, Natural Resources and Energy, and the Department of Energy Secretary Alfonso Cusi. Okay. And then finally, the Bangsamoro Sustainable Development Board. Now, this one is supposed to be set up through a law. So we drafted a bill on this, Bill number 53. It proposes the creation of the BSDB. It underwent its first reading last June 16, 2021. So we're now March 2022. There are no updates yet on this. Kung anong nangyari dito. Okay. Now, what are the principles of IGR in the Bangsamoro? In the next slide, please. Now, all of these mechanisms that I mentioned earlier are guided by the principles set by the Bangsamoro government, and it's found here. Those IGR bodies are based on the principle of mutual respect, interdependence, and civic participation. So there should be mutual respect between the different, vertically and horizontally. There should be interdependence of it between and among the levels of governance to cooperate and collaborate, and then there should be civic participation. Next slide, please. Okay. So now that we have covered the IGR, basically, ano yung nasa batas and what's happening now, we also ought to we need to examine the relations of the Bangsamoro government, regional now, to the LGUs. Note that the BOL has also mentioned in the regional policy that, that such IGR governs also such relationship. Now, Article 6, Section 10 provides that authority to the Bangsamoro government to regulate the affairs of constituent LGUs is in accordance with the BOL and the BLGC to be enacted by the Parliament. So, take note of the term regulate. So, we can pass a BARMM local government code so that the regional government can regulate the affairs of the constituent LGUs. Okay? Doesn't talk about supervision. So insofar as the specific roles and responsibilities of these LGUs are concerned, the BOL has allowed the interim government to decide and determine its policy through the enactment of a local government code. Now, this attaches a great significance to the coverage and policies to be enshrined by the BLGC. Now, let us take a look at the IGR mechanisms that it proposes. So I'm talking about the proposed Bangsamoro Local Government Code. You will find that in Book 1, Title 1, Chapter 2, Section 17 of the draft Bangsamoro Local Government Code. By the way, who drafted the Local Government Code for the BARMM? It wasn't the Parliament. Okay? So just to give you context, normally, in normal situations in other countries which have a parliamentary form of government, all laws and policies are drafted and passed in the Parliament. It's in the Parliament. But in our case, there was a decision of the majority, which is of course the MILF-led BTA, that laws will be drafted by the government of the day, by the cabinet. So they formed TWGs, they formed task forces to draft that. But in the Parliament, initially in 2019, following the model of all other parliamentary forms of government in other countries, we started setting up some committees that will be drafting the priority codes. But these were later dissolved because the majority deems it a responsibility of the executive authority, not the Parliament. So they drafted this. There was a technical working group who drafted this local government code. No, it's not even local government code. They call this the local governance code. So if you don't wonder, if you've heard earlier the dynamic governor of Sulu, the province of Sulu, lamenting a lot of, the whole situation, because they were not consulted and there were these issues. So he was actually reflecting on, it's a reflection of the sentiment of all the other local government units. Also for the members of the Parliament who are here, it's embarrassing, yes, but we were not part of the drafting of the local government code. Then it was filed in the Parliament. Now it's in the Parliament. Then we're now going to conduct consultations. But again, the majority stopped us from conducting consultations because of the Mandanas ruling. So that's why we discussed Mandana's ruling earlier. So they said we cannot go on with the local government code consultations because the Mandana's ruling came. There's a joint, there's an executive order, there's a joint resolution between DILG and the DBM. So currently, not a single LGU in the BARMM has drafted its Devolution Transition Plan or DTP. Wala. Bakit? There's no instruction from the regional government, from the MILG. There's also no direct instruction from the DILG to the local government units. So we're now hanging, but this Mandanas ruling is supposed to be implemented already. So there has to be a DTP coming from the LGUs, each LGU, and there has to be a DTP also by the regional government. Ano na ngayon ang magiging function ng regional government? Because, as I mentioned this morning, during the ARMM time, supposedly, with the passage of the local government code, the powers of the national government, the agencies at the national level, were devolved. So they were devolved to the regional government, and from the regional government, well, the LGC automatically devolved the powers to the LGUs. But in practice, these were not devolved. And when I say these were not devolved, that means the LGUs were not executing these provisions. So who were implementing programs on health, education, agriculture, and environment? It was the regional autonomous government. Now in the BARMM, it's still the regional autonomous government. So in the parliament, whenever at the end of the year we draft the Bangsamoro Appropriations Act, which is similar to the GAA of the national level, we allocate funds for implementation of basic programs on basic services. Okay, so the question now is, if the Mandanas ruling is implemented, the ERA or NTA of the LGUs will now be increased, and they're supposed to implement already. It's supposed to be devolved to them. There are municipalities and provinces in the BARMM which has devolved functions because they became part of ARMM at that time after those powers are already devolved. So if you go to Basilan, health and education and agriculture and environment is devolved. So they have their own provincial social welfare officer and municipal social welfare officers paid for by the provincial government. If you go to Marawi City, that's also the case because Marawi City came later into the ARM. So they have the functions like that. They allocate funds for those basic services. But for all the rest, except of course Cotabato City, which is new to the BARMM, also has devolved functions and will just continue to implement the Mandanas ruling. But for the rest now, what will happen now? Definitely, as explained earlier, there is now a devolution of the funds from the national government to the LGUs, including the BARMM. What happens now to the regional government? What if we are the purpose of the Mandanas ruling is to maximize resources, di ba? So that there's no duplication of functions and we can maximize the resources. What happens now to the block grant? The resources that we allocate in the parliament to the different ministries for implementation of basic services. What will happen now? Kasi meron ng budget sa baba. So then, if that's the case, it's either we also devolve that or we are going to use those funds for other purposes or for additional purposes. So basically, the Mandanas ruling would increase funding and increase the responsibility. So with increased funding comes increased responsibility of the LGUs plus additional assistance coming from the regional government, just like the national government. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, under Chapter 3 on IGR Body, it's also found there. There are provisions on IGR about on the Chief Minister having exclusive authority. This is in the local government code drafted by the MILG. It says that the Chief Minister will have exclusive, to the exclusion of others, including the President, exclusive authority to supervise and regulate the LGUs, the constituent LGUs of the BARMM, consistent with the basic policy on regional autonomy. So this has already been discussed this morning. Definitely, the Parliament will have a bloody deliberation and would amend this provision. The implementation of all national policies and standards concerning the constituent LGUs shall be agreed between the national government and the Bangsamoro government through the IGR Body. And then it also says that it is adopting the provisions of the Local Government Code, the 1991 Local Government Code. And the BLGC allows the LGUs to group themselves, consolidate, coordinate their efforts, services, and resources. Okay, so I have a recommendation on this, which I will mention later. Okay, next slide. Now, the Mandanas ruling was already explained earlier. It's now the NTA. By 2022, it will increase from 695 billion in 2021 to 959 billion in 2022. How does it affect the regional government? So from our discussion earlier, so from all of those national revenues, the IRA will be deducted first, and what remains, doon i-multiply yung factor, yung 5% of the national income, national revenues, doon i-multiply yung 5%, and that's the block grant. Which means that we are expecting, once this will be implemented, the block grant will be lower. The amount for the block grant will be lower. It will affect the block grant of the Bangsamoro government. So what does that mean for us? What is the implication of that for the regional government? That means we have to review our budget. Not only do we need to review the 40-60 requirement, because there is a 40 PS requirement and 60% requirement for MOE and capital outlay. But this is normally violated, so it's not very stringent in the BARMM among some ministries. So we would have to look into that. But take note, even if the block grant will be lower because of the Mandanas ruling, we have what we call the Special Development Fund. The Special Development Fund is at 5 billion pesos per year. So we have 5 billion in 2020, 2021, and 2022. We now have 15 billion Special Development Fund. It's found in the BOL, national government, DBM, thank you very much. It has done its part and downloaded the 15 billion pesos based on a list of projects that were submitted by the regional autonomous government. Now, what is the purpose of the Special Development Fund? It's supposed to be for conflict-affected areas. Areas like the former MILF areas, MNLF areas that have been affected by conflict, for these areas to be rehabilitated. The SDF is also for the women, girls, and children who were affected, the widows who were affected, including decommissioned combatants, former combatants, not just of the MILF, but also of the MNLF, because it's for conflict-affected areas. Okay, but in reality, when projects are listed, as you already know, those in the national government, when infra projects are being listed and identified, it's not as clear-cut as that. Now, there are parameters that we can put, that it should be conflict-affected area, this is for the widows and the orphans and the former combatants and the former camps, etc. But in reality, it's all, the dynamics there is that it's going to be affected by the political dynamics, not just at the regional government, the officials at the regional level, but also by the officials at the local level. So kung malapit itong mayor or governor, malaki yung allocation from the SDF for that area. So it can be used as a leverage, which usually happens, not just in the BARMM, but also in other parts of the country. Next slide. So how do we strengthen local governance then? What are the key issues and recommendations on IGR? Now, the important thing is that in these recommendations that I'm making, the end goal has always been to improve governance. in line with our policies on decentralization. If we improve the governance, it's not just about raising the funds for the BARMM, it's also about making sure that the people who are running the government, the agencies, are capable of doing their job, executing their functions. So the BOL has established a clear delineation of responsibilities and relationships between the national government and the regional government. It's very clear, gaya ng sabi ni Attorney Benny kanina. It has also likewise provided for the establishment of various IGR mechanisms. Nandun na. No, in writing, it's all there. We all have that. And the purpose of those IGR mechanisms is to have well-coordinated governance across these levels. But this is not the case. And I will reiterate what Attorney Benny has said. We did not talk about this. It just so happened that this is what I was thinking also. This is not the case between the regional government and the local government units in the BARMM. The enactment of the BARMM Local Governance Code is supposed to be an opportunity to address the ambiguities in the BOL, and especially on the relations of the BARMM and its constituent units. Now, it should do so with the end view. If we review and deliberate on the BARMM Local Government Code, our goal should be to make sure that we are trying to strengthen local governance. We're trying to strengthen the provincial local government of governor, where Governor Sakurtan is the governor, where others are the mayors or barangay captains, no, in the entire BARMM. And we do this through efficient service delivery. It's actually this very simple thing: good governance, efficient service delivery, genuine local autonomy, accountability, and meaningful collaboration. Meaningful collaboration. Okay. Next slide. Now, devolution requires resources, but with sufficient performance accountability systems. And this is where I saw that it's not there. It's not very clear in the draft local government code of the BARMM. Yung performance accountability systems. This should be instituted by the Bangsamoro government. Questions on incentives, performance monitoring, and partnerships with the civil society must be addressed. This is at the local government level. Take note, for us at the executive level and in the parliament, so I'm talking here about performance accountability systems in local governance. But for us in the parliament and the ministries, we are not implementing. It's not a policy. We're not implementing the SPMS. So if you work for the government, you would have to come up with IPCRs every semester and evaluate, assess the performance of every staff and every official. There has to be an SPMS. To the point that my group, together with the other MPs, we filed a resolution in the parliament requiring, mandating the whole BARMM government to implement the SPMS system. It's not just to improve, to make sure that we have efficient delivery of services, but also for purposes of incentives that will be provided to the employees and the officials. Also for the purpose of accountability. So the whole, not just the SPMS, the good governance conditions, the transparency seal, lahat ng mga yon that the ARMM used to implement because it was required by the national government. Until today, it is still required. And during the ARMM, we were able to receive the PBB, performance-based bonus, because of that. So complying with the procurement process and the PhilJEP system, making sure that all procurements are enrolled or registered at the PhilJEP system. These things, they're very technical. Yes, it's very difficult to understand for someone who has not been in the government, but these are the accountability mechanisms that we need to continue doing if we are to improve not just IGR, but the whole concept of local governance in the BARMM. So setting clear parameters in the Bangsamoro governments over the authority of the Bangsamoro government over the LGUs, no? Will also disperse the political power. And that is also one of the reasons why the Mandanas ruling was ruled by the Supreme Court, and now it has now become a policy. We need to disperse political power in the context of BARMM, political power from the regional government to the local government units. Why do we need to disperse political power? With political power comes funding and much-needed programs for the LGUs. Kasi parang ang layo-layo ng Cotabato City where the regional government is. Kaya, hindi alam ng taga-Sulu, ng taga-Tawi-Tawi, ay programa pala yan ng BARMM Regional Government. Na-transfer na pala sa MBHTE ang aming university, ang aming college. Hindi namin alam. Bakit wala pa kaming sweldo hanggang ngayon? For example, we are the track is Tawi-Tawi Regional Agriculture College, no? So, bakit wala pa? So, all these things, hindi to alam ng mga tao sa baba. Even the parliamentary form of government, the term parliamentary form of government, this is not understood on the ground. Kami lang nag-aaway, nagde-deliberate sa parliament every time we have a session. Well, we also, we have live coverage of the parliament deliberations, but that is not enough. What does that mean? Then it means the regional government has to go down, disperse its political power, go down and talk to the people on the ground. What is the Bangsamoro Organic Law? People do not understand what it is. So if you go to an island in Sulu, in Tawi-Tawi, or in Basilan, and you tell them about parliamentary form of government in the Bangsamoro, ay, hindi, ewan ko, basta may nagkaroon daw ng plebiscite, and then pasok na kami sa BARMM. So, Sulu is complaining. Governor Sakurtan is complaining. So, we need to set clear parameters on the dispersal of political power from the regional to the local government units. So, it has to, this kind of political dispersal, the dispersal of political power has to be in line with the constitutional policies on decentralization and local economy. So ultimately, it needs to be consistent with our goals of revitalizing regional democracy and also realizing our RSD, di ba? Moros. So we have a moro from the National DILG. That has been our battle cry, the right to self-determination. We need to be able to determine our future on our own terms, but reconciling with the constitutional provisions, the constitutional precepts. And we need to be able to attract, that's very important for me, moral professionals to go back to BARMM and help BARMM. Okay, so that's why, in my case, for example, I voted with reservations on the BARMM Civil Service Code because they removed the CES requirement. My classmate, Dean Sanjay, they removed the CES requirement in the BARMM. So what they've agreed upon, and this is now a policy under the Civil Service Code, is that there are no third-level positions in the BARMM, but there are CES eligibles like us in the BARMM. There are many moral professionals. What will happen now? So even if we say, yes, moral professionals, CES eligibles are still welcome in the BARMM, but that would mean that the appointing authority, by removing third-level eligibility positions, third-level positions, the appointing authority can now appoint persons to managerial positions without any eligibility. And that discourages a lot of our moral professionals. When they go there, they want to apply as schools division superintendent, but third level eligibility is not required. So someone who is just a teacher one can probably be a superintendent, schools division superintendent. Or a director can be someone can be a director without third level eligibility. So these things are very important. We need to set clear parameters to that. Now remember, the BARMM was created not to add just an additional layer. I know what the national, well, what some people think outside the BARMM. Yung BARMM regional government, that's just another layer. Kung pwede, diretso na from the national to the local government units, the provinces. But that's not the case. Iba yung autonomous region, yung BARMM autonomous region. So the whole point is not to centralize public service, not to centralize it at the regional level, but to make service delivery efficient by putting it closer to the people. And that is the essence of devolution and decentralization. Do not centralize the power, the functions, the services, and the funding in Cotabato at the regional government center, but bring it down closer to the local government level. We cannot, this means, on the question, is BARMM an LGU? Whether it is or an LGU or not, there are different theories on that, but the BARMM cannot act as an LGU and say that that is my power, and so I'm going to cordon this black grant and this SDF. Kami lang ang mag-implement nito. We cannot do that. We have to bring that down to the constituent units, which are the LGUs. And the LGUs are the ones who are best positioned to know what are their needs and to deliver these services directly to the constituents. But merong caveat. Yes, we bring it down, but we have also to make sure that the LGUs are capacitated. They are capacitated and they have the absorptive capacity to accept the increased era and accept those programs coming from the regional government. Take note, currently in the BARMM, almost all of the LGUs, siguro 95% are ERA dependent. Okay? The regional government naman, kami, we have a very big block grant plus special development fund. But our BUR, budget utilization rate every year is just between 20 to 40%. So every year, may sobra sa 65 billion pesos or 75 billion pesos. So there's a lot of funds right at our regional government level, nasa regional treasury, because we weren't able to finish disbursing that, implementing the programs. Well, not the parliament, but the different ministries, the different agencies. Okay, so kailangan din we are aware of that. Okay, so finally, this is my last slide. Additional 2 recommendations on IGR, the regional and local devolution. I have a couple of suggestions to reflect the previous points on the Bangsamoro Local Governance Code. Now, due to the limited time, I'll focus only on 2 areas. So number 1, to avoid duplicity and overlap of services and functions, the Bangsamoro Local Governance Code, Government Code dapat, should also provide for the role of the Bangsamoro government relative to the functions of the LGUs in delivering basic services. Can we find that in the current local government code? No. We can't find that. So we need to have the political will. Tumawa si Anwar because he was ES before, prior to me in the ARMM. And every year, we tried to devolve those functions and include and allocate funds for the local government units. We tried to devolve that, but it was difficult. Well, for a lot of reasons. But basically, it's about political will. So while we're trying to bring that down, we also have to rethink the timeline for the comprehensive review or assessment of LGU capacity. We need to review and assess their capacity to implement the Mandanas ruling and to implement the devolution from the regional government to the local government units. This is very important. Okay? So for example, yun yung general. Some specifics, for example, in times of disaster, given that social services is a devolved function, it's supposed to be under the barangay, if it's in the barangay, the whole DRM concept, under the NDRIMC. If it involves 2 or more barangays, it's the municipality or city. 2 or more municipalities, it's the province. 2 or more provinces, it's the regional government. Diba? Ganon yung ano. But, what is the policy currently of the regional government? We don't have it yet. Previously, meron in the ARMM, but now we have to pass a law. How will the Bangsamoro government and the LGUs coordinate in the DRM efforts? What we have now is that we have BARMM ready, which is under the MILG. It's strange because under the structure, under the NDRIMC, you have 4 pillars, and response is under DSWD. The DILG takes care of what? Capacity building. Prevention is DOST. Rehabilitation is under NEDA. But in the BARMM, we have the BARMM Ready, which used to be the ARMM Humanitarian Emergency Action Response Team, or AMHART. It's now under the MILG, which is supposed to handle only capacity building. Plus, you have the MSSD doing the same thing, doing relief. BARMM Ready doing also relief. Other ministries doing relief. MPs also doing relief operations. So everyone is doing the same thing in sometimes, well, most of the time, in the same areas. So sayang talaga yung resources. So we need to have a policy on this. Okay. For example, another example, last na to, if an LGU already has a program, let's say Cotabato City has a program to distribute seeds or other assistance to the farmers of Cotabato City. What will MAFAR, the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries, and Agrarian Reform, do? Will it be a policy also of MAFAR to develop the same program? Or will it rather strengthen the linkages between MAFAR and Cotabato City? How? By directing its support to the city. At hindi na siya mag-duplicate ng the same program na ginagawa na ng city or ng municipality. So those things have to be clarified. Second, okay, and this is the last one, is interlocal and sectoral cooperation. So services should be coordinated and covered by adjoining LGUs. For example, municipalities and cities to address current capacity gaps. So, for example, under Section 33, there has to be a formal IGR mechanism for interlocal cooperation. Related to this is my discussion earlier with our fellow MPs is the SGAD, not SAGADA. This is the Special Geographic Area Development Authority. So, the government of the day wants to set this up. Now, this is the classic another bureaucratic layer. My opinion, legal opinion, is that it's another layer because there are 63 barangays in the special geographic areas that are connected to municipalities that are not part of Maguindanao, not part of BARMM. They're part of North Cotabato. They cannot vote, by the way, this coming election. They cannot vote for mayor, for governor, and all other officials except national officials. Why? Because hanging sila. So they're not under any of the municipalities. They're not also directly under any of the municipalities of BARMM. So the solution that was seen is to set up this development authority. But what is the purpose of this development authority? The same as the purpose of the regional government, which is to do service delivery for the barangays. So why not create already whatever political unit needs to be created? Kailangan bang gawin siyang municipality or mayroong bill, na, may law na ipapasa para magiging part na siya ng some municipalities in Maguindanao. This is really very important. If we did our job collectively as the BTA, we should have had already created the political unit for the 63 special geographic area and no longer create another layer. So just imagine, national government, regional government, special development authority in the special geographic area, bago yung mga barangays doon. So, it's just another layer, more resources will be wasted. Okay. So, that's it. Next slide. Last na ba? Yes. So, thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.